Do you really think you can stop me? Alana and I have history, something you'll never understand.
You're right, you'll never understand how someone can call obsession love. But here's what I do understand: your history with Alana is over. And if you don't back off, your future will be, too.
Alana Lane had never been the type to follow the rules, but marrying a man she'd met once on a blind date, even she hadn't seen that coming. But Elliot Lincoln wasn't just any man. He was magnetic, commanding, and devastatingly handsome. One look, and she was hooked. Saying "I do" felt like a fairy tale beginning to a whirlwind romance. The morning after their wedding, reality hit her like a freight train. Walking into Lincoln Enterprises, where she worked as a junior executive, she found herself face to face with her new husband, Elliot Lincoln, the company's enigmatic new CEO. He didn't bat an eye, his expression cool and composed as he addressed the room. But when their gazes locked, Alana saw the faintest flicker of amusement in his eyes. Later that evening, he confirmed what she already suspected. "For now, let's keep this between us," he said over a quiet dinner. "The fewer complications, the better." At work, Elliot was untouchable, every inch the powerful CEO. His commands were sharp, his presence overwhelming. But behind closed doors, he was a different man entirely. They shared stolen moments of laughter, playful banter, and whispered confessions late into the night. Their private world was intoxicating, and Alana found herself falling deeply, irreversibly in love. But fairy tales have a way of turning into nightmares. It began innocently enough. A bouquet of lilies left on her desk. Alana assumed it was from Elliot, a subtle gesture of affection he'd mastered since their secret union. But the note attached told a different story. "Did you think I'd let you go so easily, Jay?" Her heart froze. She didn't need to guess who it was. James Clark. James wasn't just an ex-fiancé. He was a storm that had once nearly destroyed her. The golden boy of City A, he was charming, wealthy, and dangerously possessive. Leaving him had been a battle for her freedom, a battle she thought she'd won. Now he was back, and he wasn't here for closure. James's reappearance was like a toxin seeping into her carefully built happiness. He made his intentions clear in their first encounter, a chance meeting outside her office. "Alana," he drawled, his voice dripping with dark amusement. "Did you really think I'd let him have you?" She brushed him off, but James wasn't one to take rejection lightly. He began inserting himself into her life in ways that made her blood run cold. Lavish gifts she didn't want, cryptic texts at all hours, and then, the most unsettling of all, becoming a business partner at Lincoln Enterprises. Elliot was livid when he found out. "You should have told me," he said one night, his voice low but cutting. "I didn't want to drag you into this," she replied, tears welling in her eyes. "That's not your decision to make," he snapped, his frustration evident. "We're supposed to face things together, Alana." James's obsession escalated, and with it came a wave of chaos. He spread malicious rumors about Alana in the company, insinuating an affair between them. He manipulated board members, creating rifts in Elliot's leadership. The final straw came when James revealed his trump card, photos from their time together, intimate moments twisted into weapons. "Leave him," James demanded, his voice cold, "or I'll make sure he regrets ever meeting you." Desperate and cornered, Alana did the unthinkable. She met Elliot at their home, tears streaming down her face as she tried to find the words. "Elliot," she began, her voice trembling. He reached for her, but she stepped back, shaking her head. "I can't do this anymore. I want a divorce." The words shattered him. His usually impenetrable composure cracked, and for the first time, Alana saw raw pain in his eyes. "You don't mean that," he said, his voice breaking. But she didn't have a choice. She left, her heart splintering with every step she took away from the man she loved. Days turned into weeks of torment. She tried to move on. Work became her sanctuary, a place where she could drown herself in deadlines and spreadsheets. But even there, Elliot's shadow loomed. During meetings, her mind would drift to the sound of his commanding voice, the way he used to fill a room with his presence. Every time her phone buzzed, she'd hope it was him, only to feel the crushing weight of disappointment when it wasn't. One evening, as she walked through a quiet park on her way home, a soft drizzle began to fall. She pulled her coat tighter around her, her boots crunching against the wet gravel. But then she saw a man standing under a street lamp, a tall, broad figure in a tailored navy coat. Her breath caught in her throat, her heart hammering in her chest. For a moment she thought it was Elliot, but as the man turned and walked away, the ache in her chest deepened. "I'm losing my mind," she whispered to herself, her voice trembling. "Why can't I let him go?" Back in her apartment, Alana curled up on the worn-out couch, clutching a blanket around her shoulders. The soft hum of the TV played in the background, but she wasn't watching. Her eyes were fixed on the framed photo sitting on the coffee table, a candid shot of her and Elliot at a company event. His smile in the photo was warm, his arm draped protectively around her. She traced her finger over his face, a fresh wave of pain washing over her. "I should have stayed," she murmured, her voice barely audible. But she knew it wasn't that simple. James's threat still loomed over her like a dark cloud, and the guilt of dragging Elliot into the chaos was a weight she couldn't shake. Yet the longer she was apart from him, the more she felt like she was suffocating. The thought of reaching out crossed her mind every day. Her fingers hovered over his name in her phone, but she could never bring herself to press call. Instead, she sat in the quiet, letting the ache of his absence consume her. Every night was the same. Alana would drift into a restless sleep, only to find herself back in Elliot's arms in her dreams. His blue eyes would look at her with that unyielding intensity, his touch gentle but firm. "Why did you leave me?" Dream Elliot would ask, his voice breaking. "I had to," she'd reply, tears streaming down her cheeks. But the dream would always end the same way, him disappearing into the distance, his silhouette fading until she was left alone in the darkness. Ilana would wake up gasping, clutching her pillow as though it could bring her comfort. But the reality was harsher than the dreams. He was gone, and she didn't know if she'd ever see him again. Elliot, on the other hand, was relentless. Refusing to let James win, he launched his own investigation. What he uncovered was more sinister than either of them could have imagined. James wasn't just obsessed, he was dangerous. The breaking point came when James cornered Alana in an underground parking lot, his eyes wild. "You think he can protect you? You're mine, Alana. You always will be." Alana stood frozen, her heart pounding in her chest as James loomed before her. His usually polished appearance was disheveled, his dark suit slightly wrinkled, his tie askew, and his sandy blonde hair falling into his wild, glassy eyes. His voice was low, dangerous, filled with unhinged determination. "You can't run from me, Alana," James hissed, his breath coming in sharp bursts. "No one takes what's mine." Alana's trembling hand gripped the strap of her leather purse, her knuckles white. She wore a simple, elegant outfit, a fitted burgundy blouse tucked into tailored black slacks, paired with sleek heels that clicked nervously against the concrete floor. Her hazel eyes darted around, searching for an escape, but James blocked her path. Fear coursed through her, mingling with anger. "You don't own me, James," she said, her voice shaking but defiant. "You never did." Just as James took a threatening step forward, another sound echoed through the lot. The deliberate click of polished shoes against the concrete. The sound grew louder, more menacing, until a familiar, commanding voice rang out. "She belongs to herself." Elliot stepped out from the shadows, his presence electrifying the space. He was dressed impeccably, as always, in a tailored black suit with a dark navy shirt underneath, the top button undone. His piercing blue eyes were cold and sharp, locked onto James like a predator stalking its prey. His strong jaw was set, and his broad shoulders seemed to fill the room with authority. The dim light glinted off the silver cufflinks on his sleeves as he adjusted them casually, his calm demeanor masking the storm brewing inside him. "Alana doesn't need me to protect her," Elliot continued, his voice a lethal blend of calm and fury. "But you've crossed a line, James, and now you're going to deal with me." James spun around, his eyes narrowing as he faced Elliot. "Ah, the knight in shining armor," he sneered, his tone mocking. "Do you really think you can stop me? Ilana and I have history, something you'll never understand." Elliot's lips curled into a cold smile, his gaze unwavering. You're right, I'll never understand how someone can call obsession love. But here's what I do understand. Your history with Alana is over. And if you don't back off, your future will be too. Alana's breath caught as the tension between the two men crackled like a live wire. James's hands balled into fists, his body rigid with fury, while Elliot stood calm and unshakable, his very presence a warning. As Elliot stepped closer, placing himself protectively between Alana and James, her fear began to dissipate, replaced by a wave of relief and an undeniable spark of hope. Elliot, she whispered, her voice barely audible. He glanced back at her, his expression softening for a fleeting moment. It's going to be okay, Alana, he said, his tone steady and reassuring. The moment was brief, but it was enough to steady her racing heart. She wasn't alone anymore, and for the first time since James's return, she felt safe. Few days later at the board meeting of Lincoln Enterprises, Elliot stood at the head of the table, commanding the room in a tailored midnight blue suit, his tie sharp and precise. His expression was a mask of cool authority, but his blazing blue eyes betrayed his simmering fury. In stark contrast, James sat across from him, a mix of arrogance and unease clouding his features. Dressed in a designer suit, he looked polished, but a faint sheen of sweat on his brow betrayed his nervousness. Elliot's voice was calm but laced with menace as he began. I've been patient, James, but my patience has its limits. You've crossed them all. He tapped a button on the tablet before him, and the screen behind him came to life. Documents, photos, and video footage appeared, evidence meticulously gathered by his investigators. Each piece unraveled James's lies, exposing his underhanded business deals, blackmail schemes, and even the surveillance of Alana. The room filled with gasps from the few executives present as Elliot continued, his tone sharp and unyielding. This is what you've been hiding, and now everyone will see the real you. James's face paled, his confidence cracking. He tried to interrupt, his voice rising in desperation. This is a setup. You can't prove. Elliot cut him off with a cold smile. Oh, but I can, and I already have. I've sent this to every major media outlet in the city. By the end of the day, your name will be synonymous with scandal. Elena watched the showdown from the corner of the room, her heart pounding as the truth unraveled before her eyes. She wore a fitted emerald green dress that complemented her hazel eyes, her hair swept into a sleek bun. Despite the turmoil inside, she stood tall, her arms crossed, exuding quiet strength. Elliot glanced at her briefly, his gaze softening for a moment before returning to James with renewed resolve. She nodded, silently telling him she was with him in this fight. James slammed his fists on the table, his voice cracking with rage. You think this will stop me? You're nothing compared to me. Elliot stepped closer, his towering presence casting a shadow over James. You're done, James. The board has already voted to terminate your partnership. Security is waiting to escort you out. As if on cue, two burly security guards entered the room, their stern expressions leaving no room for argument. James glared at Alana, his voice venomous. This isn't over. Elliot's voice turned ice cold. Oh, it is. And if you come near her again, you'll regret it. Consider this your only warning. James was dragged out of the building, his protests echoing down the halls. The air in the boardroom felt lighter, but the tension remained. Elliot turned to Alana, his expression soft yet determined. It's over, he said, his voice steady. She stepped closer, her eyes brimming with emotion. You didn't have to do this for me. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. I'd do it 1,000 times over, Alana. You're worth it. For the first time in weeks, she smiled, a small, genuine smile that spoke of hope. Despite everything, she realized she could trust him with her heart again. When the dust settled, Elliot found Alana sitting alone in the apartment they once shared. Her face was pale, her eyes rimmed red from crying. I thought I was protecting you, she whispered as he approached. But all I did was hurt you. Elliot knelt before her, taking her hands in his. I don't need protecting, Alana. I need you. I need us. She sobbed, the weight of her pain pouring out as he held her. I was so scared of losing you, she admitted. "You'll never lose me," he promised, his voice steady. "But don't ever leave me again. We fight together, no matter what." Their kiss was desperate, passionate, a reunion of two hearts that had been broken and healed together. With James out of their lives and their love stronger than ever, Alana and Elliot faced the future with unshakable resolve. Their secret marriage was no longer a secret, but a beacon of their resilience. Because some love stories aren't just about falling in love, they're about fighting for it, through heartbreak, betrayal, and every twist fate throws their way.